I'm not usually one to post things online, but what happened to me that night has never left my mind. And maybe writing it down will help me sleep a little better. My name's Eleanor, and this happened 2 winters ago, right after Christmas. I was 71 at the time, and had gone up to the old house in the hills of West Virginia, the one my husband Walter left me when he passed. It's a quiet place, about 6 miles from town, surrounded by pine trees and winding roads that don't see much salt in the winter. I only go up there once in a while to check on things and get away from the noise. That night, a blizzard had rolled in fast. Thick snow, wind screaming like it was angry at the trees. I had enough firewood and soup stock to last the weekend. That was the plan anyway. I remember I was sitting in the living room with a quilt over my knees, radio static filling the silence because the local station had cut out an hour earlier. Power was still holding on, but just barely. I was knitting, trying to distract myself from the wind battering the side of the house like it was testing the strength of every board. Then came the knock. At first, I thought it was just the wind shifting something on the porch. But it came again, firm and deliberate. I peeked through the window and saw a young man standing there bundled in a dark coat, face red from the cold. He looked barely older than 25, thin, with one of those scruffy beards that never quite fills in. When I opened the door just a crack, he gave a small smile and said, "Ma'am, I'm real sorry to bother you, but I wrecked my truck up the road and I've been walking for half an hour. I just need somewhere warm till morning." I hesitated. I really did. But he wasn't pushy. His name was Luke, he said, and he held his hands out, palms up, like he didn't want any trouble. I asked if he was hurt, and he said just a bruise or two. No cell signal, of course. I could barely get a bar on a clear day out there, and the phone lines were dead. It didn't feel right to leave someone out there in that weather, even if something in my gut whispered to be careful. I let him in. He wiped his boots, thanked me a dozen times, and sat by the fireplace like a polite guest. I made him a cup of tea. He asked about the house, told me about his old Chevy that slid into a ditch. He wasn't overly chatty, but he smiled when he talked, and I remember thinking, maybe I misjudged him. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But as the night went on, there were little things that started to itch at me. He never really gave a clear answer about where he was headed. Just a buddy's place a few towns over. His hands. They were clean. Too clean for someone who just climbed out of a wreck in a snowstorm. No blood, no dirt under the nails. And his coat. Nice, heavy, barely dusted with snow, like he hadn't been walking that long at all. He watched me a bit too closely when I walked into the kitchen. His eyes lingered on the hallway, on the pictures of my family. At one point, I caught him glancing toward the door to the basement. I told myself I was being silly. Just an old woman alone in a storm, letting her imagination run wild. But I started locking the bedroom door when I stepped out, just in case. Around midnight, I brought out some extra blankets and told him he could sleep on the couch. He thanked me again, polite as ever, and laid down without complaint. I went to my room and locked the door, even wedged a chair under the knob, which I'd never done before, not even when I stayed alone. I couldn't sleep. The wind howled like something alive, and every creak in the house made me flinch. At some point, I thought I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and careful. But when I sat up and strained to listen, it was dead silent. I kept telling myself it was just the old floors settling, but deep down, I didn't believe it. My heart thudded so loud it felt like it was echoing off the walls. I must have dozed off sometime around 3 a.m. When I woke up, it was still dark, but the wind had calmed. I tiptoed out of the room, heart pounding, and found the living room empty. The blankets were folded neatly, teacup rinsed in the sink. The door was locked, chain still in place. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. I checked every room, even the basement, half expecting to find something, I don't know what. But there was nothing out of place. The only thing I noticed was a small wet patch by the back door, like someone had stood there dripping snow. But that door was still locked too. It didn't make sense. When the sun finally came up, I turned on the radio, hoping the storm had passed enough for town to start moving again. That's when I heard it. The local station was back on, and they were reading a bulletin from the sheriff's office. A man had escaped custody the night before, suspected of armed robbery and assault, last seen heading north through rural areas. Then they gave a description. Mid to late 20s, about 6 feet tall. Thin build, dark coat, scruffy beard. My stomach dropped. They said his name was Luke Carter. I nearly dropped the radio when I heard it. Same name, same face. I didn't even have to see the photo. I knew. I checked the small lockbox I kept under the bed. Not because I thought he'd find it, but because something in me needed to know. The box had been forced open. He took Walter's old watch, the one I'd wrapped in a handkerchief and kept ever since the funeral. It wasn't worth much money-wise, but it was the last thing he ever gave me. I stood there holding the empty box, heart in my throat, feeling sick. That man sat by my fire, drank my tea, slept under my roof. And all the while, he was someone else entirely. Someone dangerous. Someone running. The sheriff came by later that afternoon once the road was finally cleared. I called as soon as the power stabilized and told them everything. What he looked like, what he said, what he took. They took it seriously. I'll give them that. 2 deputies walked through the property, looked for tracks, but by then the snow had already covered most of it. They told me I was lucky. Said the guy had broken into a house a week earlier and tied up an older couple to steal their car. "You don't know what he could have done," one of them said, and I knew he was right. I keep thinking about that moment when I opened the door, how close his face was to mine, how calm he looked. I started double-checking every lock after that, even the windows, even during the day. I added motion lights, a security camera by the front porch. Not that any of it would have helped that night. The storm knocked out everything. I kept telling myself it could have ended worse. He could have hurt me. He didn't. But I don't think it was kindness that stopped him. I think he just got what he came for. He wanted something personal, something people wouldn't trace. He picked the right house, an old widow off the main road, alone during a storm. I don't think it was an accident. I think he watched the place, waited for the right night. For weeks after, I kept checking the news, thinking maybe they'd catch him. But he never turned up. No arrests, no new sightings, just silence, like he'd vanished again into the snow. I didn't tell my kids right away, didn't want them worrying, but eventually I sat them down and explained what had happened. My son begged me to sell the place, said I was lucky and next time might be different. But I couldn't let go of that house. Walter built it. Every beam, every nail. And I wasn't going to let some drifter take that from me too. Still, I don't go up there in the winter anymore. Not since that night. I stay in town when the snow starts, and I only go back when the sun's out and the roads are dry. That house used to feel like the safest place in the world to me. Quiet, peaceful. Now it feels like a reminder. A reminder that even the most polite smile can hide something dangerous. That the wrong knock at the door can change everything. And that sometimes you don't realize you were in danger until it's already too late. I was 17 when it happened. Still living with my parents in a one-story house just outside a small town in Oregon, surrounded by nothing but trees and fog in the mornings. We were one of those families who never locked the sliding door during the night, mostly because the backyard was fenced off, and beyond that was just forest. My parents trusted the quietness of the place, and honestly, so did I. I had just started my senior year of high school, and was spending most nights in the living room on my laptop, writing dumb stories and staying up too late. That night, I was alone in the living room, lights dimmed, earbuds in, half watching YouTube when it started. At first, I thought it was a branch or something. A dull thump, like something hit the glass behind me. I didn't even take out my earbuds. But then it happened again, louder, sharper. I paused the video and turned around slowly, not expecting anything. What I saw made my stomach drop. There was a man at the sliding glass door. Not just standing there, but pressed against it, both palms flat on the glass, staring directly inside. His face was pale, smeared with what looked like blood, and he was barefoot, shivering. His clothes were soaked, his shirt clinging to his body like he'd climbed out of a lake. I froze. He knocked again, this time with the side of his fist. Not hard, more like tapping, almost desperate. I remember I didn't move for a good 10 seconds, just stared at him like I was watching a horror movie from inside it. Then he spoke, or kind of mouthed, because I couldn't hear through the glass. I took out my earbuds and cracked the sliding door an inch, enough to hear. "Please," he said. "I've been in an accident. Someone's chasing me." His voice was shaky, panicked, but he kept glancing over his shoulder like he expected someone to come charging out of the woods behind him. Everything in me said not to open the door. I told him to wait, and that I was calling for help. He begged again, said his phone was dead, said someone had tried to run him off the road, that his car was wrecked down the hill. "Please," he kept saying. "They're still out there. I need to come inside." I grabbed the house phone with one hand and dialed 911, while keeping the other hand on the door handle. He looked youngish, maybe early 30s, with dark blonde hair plastered to his forehead. His jeans were torn at the knees, and there were fresh cuts on his feet. I told the dispatcher there was an injured man at my back door, and as I gave our address, he suddenly said something that didn't match his story at all. He said, "I was hiking. I got lost in the woods. Someone found me and tried to kill me." I remember blinking, trying to process that. A minute ago he said he was in a car accident. Now he was talking about being lost in the forest? I asked him to repeat himself, and he paused for a second, like he was trying to remember what he'd said. "No, I meant, I crashed my car while trying to get away. I was hiking before that." It didn't make sense. I started to feel that tight knot in my chest that only comes when something's really wrong. Like your brain is trying to catch up to what your gut already knows. The dispatcher told me officers were already en route and to stay inside. I told the guy help was coming, but he just shook his head, eyes wide. No, you don't understand," he whispered. "You can't leave me out here. He's going to come. He knows I saw him." He kept glancing to the side yard, then back at me. I asked him who he was talking about, but he didn't answer directly. Instead, he started rambling about headlights in the woods, about a figure standing in the road, about the woman, though he never explained who she was. The more he talked, the more frantic he got. And I realized something else. For someone supposedly bleeding and barefoot, he didn't seem all that hurt. His posture was too steady, his voice too controlled at certain moments, like it slipped in and out of performance. I noticed blood on his shirt, but not pouring from any obvious wound. His face was mostly clean, aside from some scratches near his temple. And his eyes, that's what stuck with me. They kept changing, not literally, but in expression. One moment panicked, the next completely blank, like he was switching masks. It scared the hell out of me. I told him again that help was coming and that he needed to stay where he was. That's when he pressed his face right against the glass and said low and firm, "You can't trust them." It was like a switch flipped in his tone, less pleading, more warning. That's when I locked the door all the way and stepped back. I watched him stand there for maybe 30 more seconds, then suddenly he turned and walked off. Not ran, walked. Calmly, barefoot, into the darkness behind our yard. I stayed frozen by the kitchen table, the phone still in my hand. The police showed up about 10 minutes later. I explained everything. What he looked like, what he said, how his story didn't line up. They took it seriously, told me to stay inside, and went off in the direction he disappeared. One officer stayed with me, talking quietly while the others searched. I remember him asking if the guy had a weapon. I said no, or at least I didn't see one. And then one of the officers radioed in that they'd found an abandoned car down a slope, about a quarter-mile from our fence. The car was an old green Subaru Outback. The front end was smashed like it had hit a tree or rock, and both front doors were open. The officer told me it looked like someone had climbed out in a hurry. But what caught everyone off guard was what they found inside. On the passenger seat there was a woman's purse. No ID, no phone, but makeup, receipts, and a pack of gum. Stuff that clearly belonged to someone. They searched the area around the car but found no trace of anyone else. No blood, no tracks besides the ones leading toward our house. Barefoot ones. The guy hadn't mentioned a woman once. Not really. Just something vague about the woman, like she was part of some hallucination, or something he didn't want to talk about. The weirdest part? They ran the license plate and found out the car was registered to her. Not him. A woman named Kimberly Larson from Eugene, Oregon, 34 years old. No criminal record, no missing person report, nothing. Just a normal woman who suddenly wasn't where she was supposed to be. The guy never showed up again. The police searched the woods for hours, even brought in a K9 unit the next morning, but it was like he'd vanished. They put out alerts, checked local hospitals, shelters, nothing. I kept checking the news obsessively for the next few weeks. Nothing came up. It was like neither of them had ever existed. The cops didn't tell me much after that. Just that if he came back, or I saw anything strange, I should call right away. I couldn't sleep right for a month after. Every time the wind hit the glass door just right, I'd jump. I even started locking all the doors during the day, which my dad teased me for at first, until I told him everything. My mom stopped laughing the moment I said the thing about the purse. We still don't know who he was, what he wanted, or what happened to that woman. And I can't stop thinking about how deliberate he was. How quickly his story shifted. Like he was testing which one would get him through the door. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about what would have happened if I'd let him in. Just slid the door open and stepped back. Would he have hurt me? Was he running from something real? Or was he the thing to be afraid of all along? The only thing I know for sure is that he didn't come looking for help. Not really. That wasn't the way someone desperate for safety acts. He wanted access. And something deep in my bones told me not to give it to him. I never saw him again. But every now and then, when I'm visiting my parents and I walk past that sliding door at night, I still feel it. Like a shadow hanging just past the glass, waiting to test the next person's instinct. I grew up in a small farming town in Iowa, the kind of place where everyone knows your name, your dog's name, and what brand of tractor you drive. Back then, I was 19, taking a gap year before heading to community college, living with my folks and helping on the farm with my younger brother, Levi. He was 17, wiry and quick-witted, always talking a mile a minute. We had a routine: wake up before sunrise, feed the livestock, handle the equipment, and wind down after dinner watching old movies with Dad snoring on the recliner. Life was quiet, predictable, and honestly, a little boring. But that night changed everything. It was a Thursday, late September. The air had that crisp bite to it, and the sky was blacker than usual. No moon, just a thick stretch of stars. Around 11:30 p.m., Levi barged into my room, his face pale, eyes wide like he'd seen something. "You hear that?" he asked. I paused my music and listened. Faint, but definitely there. A rhythmic clanging, metal on metal. Not loud, but steady, like someone was hitting the inside of a big tin can. It was coming from the grain shed, a large, rust-red building that sat about 50 yards behind our house, where we stored feed, spare parts, and old equipment. At first we thought it was just raccoons. We'd had problems with them before, getting into the bags of grain or chewing through insulation. But this didn't sound like scurrying or rustling. It sounded deliberate, almost timed, like someone was hitting something and waiting before doing it again. Levi grabbed a flashlight, and I told him to wait, but he was already halfway out the back door. I followed him, pulling on my boots and a jacket. The night was dead quiet besides the crunch of gravel under our feet and that slow metallic banging that kept going, as if it didn't care we were getting closer. We stopped a few feet from the shed. The flashlight beam caught the dusty windows, but we couldn't see anything inside. Levi whispered, "I'll check the back," and started walking around the side. I opened the main door slowly and it gave that familiar creak. I stepped in. It smelled like old grain and motor oil, and the beam from my flashlight danced across piles of burlap, buckets, and coiled hoses. Then I heard it, breathing. Not mine, not Levi's. A soft, wet inhale, like someone was trying hard not to make a sound. I turned slowly, and there he was. A man, crouched in the far corner behind a rusted feed bin. He was filthy, his jeans torn, his eyes wide and locked on mine. In one hand, he held a hunting knife. I froze. My first instinct was to yell for Levi, but I didn't want to startle the guy or make any sudden moves. The man didn't say anything at first. He just stared, like he was waiting to see what I'd do. I took a step back, keeping the flashlight on him, and finally said, "Hey, what the hell are you doing in here?" He blinked like I'd snapped him out of a trance. Then he stood up real slow, raising one hand like he meant to show he wasn't a threat, even though the other hand still clutched that damn knife. "Ain't no need to panic," he said, voice raspy, almost hoarse. "Just passing through. Needed a place to rest is all." There was something off in his tone, too casual, like he'd practiced the line. Before I could say anything else, Levi came around the corner and stopped cold when he saw the guy. He looked at me, then at the knife, then back at me. "We're calling the sheriff," I said. The man didn't flinch. He just smiled, this weird, twitchy smile, and said, "Ain't no need for that. I'll be gone come morning." Then he stepped back into the shadows, like that was the end of the conversation. I didn't want to push it. We slowly backed out of the shed, shut the door, and ran straight inside to wake up our dad. By the time he got out there with his shotgun, the guy was gone. Not a single trace, no footprints, nothing moved. It was like he melted into the dark. We still called the sheriff, and a deputy came out the next morning. He didn't seem too concerned. Figured it was probably some drifter passing through, maybe hopped a freight train or got stranded. Said it happened more than people realized, especially this close to the tracks. We checked the security cams, but of course the ones facing the shed hadn't worked in weeks. Typical. Still, Levi and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was really wrong. That guy didn't look lost or desperate. He looked like he was waiting for something, or someone. The real punch to the gut came later that afternoon. Our neighbor, Mrs. Jennings, came by in tears. Her house was a mile down the road, and she said someone had broken in during the night. Her back door was busted, drawers rummaged through. But the real horror, her niece, Allison, who'd been staying with her that week, was missing, 17 years old. Gone. No sign of struggle, no note, no explanation. Just gone. The last time anyone had seen her was around 10 p.m. the night before. an hour before we heard the noise in the shed. As soon as we heard that, Levi and I just looked at each other. Neither of us said it out loud, but we were both thinking the same thing. That man. That damn man in the shed. I told the deputy everything again, in more detail this time. I even described the guy. White, maybe mid-30s, medium build, messy black hair, a long scar down the left side of his neck like a burn that never healed right. His clothes looked like he'd been sleeping in ditches for weeks, but his eyes, those stuck with me. They weren't wild or panicked, they were calm, focused, like he knew exactly what he was doing. When I mentioned the knife, the deputy's face changed. He asked if we remembered the make or handle. I didn't, but Levi swore it had a deer hoof carved into the base. The rest of that day felt like a fog. Cops were swarming the area, helicopters in the distance, neighbors calling around, panicking. Our town was tiny. Things like this didn't happen here. People left their doors unlocked, kids rode bikes at night, and the biggest crime in a decade had been someone stealing a bunch of pumpkins off Old Man Keller's porch. But now, the energy shifted. People locked up, talked in hushed voices. The image of that man crouched in our shed with a knife kept replaying in my mind, over and over like a loop I couldn't break. And the worst part? We let him go. We walked away. He was right there, and we let him disappear into the dark. That night, I barely slept. Every little creak of the house set me on edge. Around 2 a.m. I thought I heard footsteps outside, crunching on the gravel near the shed again. I grabbed the flashlight and looked through my window, but saw nothing. Still, I stayed up until the sun came up, half expecting to see that same filthy figure standing out by the trees. The cops kept searching for Allison, but they didn't find much. Just a shoe, half buried near a drainage ditch on the edge of the woods. Same kind she was wearing in the last photo her aunt had taken of her. But no tracks, no witnesses, nothing else. 3 days later, we found something that made my blood run cold. I was out checking the perimeter fence when Levi shouted for me from behind the barn. He'd found something shoved under a collapsed piece of plywood near the field. It was a tarp, and inside was a bundle of clothes, a hoodie, jeans, and a pair of women's sneakers, soaked and muddy. Levi picked up the hoodie and froze. "This is hers," he said. He recognized it from a school event they'd both gone to a few months back. It had their high school mascot stitched on the sleeve. We called the cops immediately. They took the clothes and sent dogs out again, but whatever scent there might have been had already vanished. The investigation dragged on for weeks. Search parties went out every other day, but nothing new turned up. No body. No signs of struggle beyond that bundle of clothes. The town started to settle back into its usual routine, like people were trying to forget. But Levi and I couldn't. We knew. We saw him. That man had been hiding on our property the same night a girl vanished without a trace. What if we'd done something? What if we hadn't backed off? What if we'd stalled him long enough for the cops to catch him? The guilt sat heavy, especially for Levi. He stopped sleeping right. Wouldn't go near the shed anymore. He kept the blinds in his room shut, 24/7, even during the day. A month later, a detective from out of state came knocking. He said the man we described matched the sketch of a suspect wanted in 2 other missing person cases. One in Nebraska, the other in South Dakota. Both were small towns. Both had teenage girls disappear. Both had weird reports of a stranger lurking on farmland just days before. The scar, the hunting knife, the way he spoke, it all lined up. But they never caught him. Never even learned his real name. They called him the Drifter in the reports. The theory was that he moved by train, hitchhiked, stayed off the grid, and picked rural towns on purpose. Places like ours where people didn't lock their doors at night. Eventually, the case went cold. Allison's aunt moved away, couldn't bear to stay in that house. Her family kept a page going online, hoping for tips or sightings, but nothing ever came from it. Life went on, or tried to. I moved out the next spring, took classes in Des Moines, tried to rebuild some sense of normal. But every now and then, usually when I visit home, I find myself standing near that shed, just staring, wondering what might have happened if I hadn't opened that door. Or if I had done more once I did. To this day, I don't know what that man was really doing in our shed. Maybe he was hiding after the fact. Maybe he was waiting for his next move. Maybe we interrupted something. All I know is, he was calm. Too calm. Like he'd done it before. And sometimes, and I hate to admit this, I still think about what would have happened if Levi had gone in there alone. If I hadn't followed him that night, would I have woken up the next morning and found him missing too? I grew up in a small suburb about 20 minutes outside Tulsa, Oklahoma, the kind of place where people leave their front doors unlocked and still wave to each other from the porch. Back in the summer of 2011, I was 12, stuck in that weird space between wanting to be a kid forever and desperately trying to act older. My best friend back then was Marissa Hayes. She lived 3 blocks from me, and we spent practically every day together, riding our bikes, sneaking snacks from her pantry, or just hanging around the playground by Lincoln Park. That playground was our little kingdom. It had this rusted merry-go-round, a set of swings that creaked like an old boat, and a shaded bench where we'd pretend we were too cool for everything. That's where we first saw her, the woman. I remember it clearly because it was one of those scorching afternoons where even the slide felt like it could burn your skin off. She was sitting on the bench under the oak tree, sipping from a can of Dr. Pepper and smoking a cigarette like she belonged there. She looked to be in her 50s, with shoulder-length reddish-blonde hair that curled at the ends, and these big sunglasses that made it hard to see where exactly she was looking. Her clothes were plain, jeans and a yellow t-shirt with the word Sunny written in faded letters. But she had this strange charm about her. She waved at us like she knew us, like we were old friends. Marissa waved back, kind of hesitant, but I didn't. I just smiled and kept walking toward the swings. A few minutes later, she walked over to us holding 2 cans of soda, grape Fanta. She said her name was Sherry and told us she came to the park all the time because it helped her feel young again. Her voice had this warm, syrupy drawl, the kind that makes everything sound friendly, even when it shouldn't. She offered us the drinks, and Marissa took one without thinking twice. I hesitated, but I didn't want to seem rude, so I took mine too. She stayed and talked with us for a bit, mostly asking silly stuff like what we liked to do and if we had boyfriends. I remember feeling a little weird about that, but Marissa thought it was funny. "She's harmless," she whispered to me after Sherry left. But Sherry didn't just leave and never come back. The next day she was there again. Same bench, same sunglasses, different soda. This time she brought Pepsi and a small box of caramel candies. She lit another cigarette and said we were her little angels, whatever that meant. I noticed then that she never really seemed to look at us directly, always just around us or at our feet. She asked if we wanted to come by her apartment sometime, said she lived just across the street at the Woodland Terrace complex, and that she had more cool stuff to show us. Old comic books, a karaoke machine, and a pet parrot named Eddie. Marissa lit up at the idea. I pretended to be interested, but something about the way she said it made my stomach twist a little. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about her. There was something off, not in a horror movie way, more like a quiet itch in the back of my mind. I asked my mom casually if she knew anyone named Sherry who lived across from Lincoln Park, but she just shrugged and said, "That's an old folks complex, I think. Why?" I didn't tell her the full story, just that we'd met someone who liked to talk to kids at the playground. Her face changed immediately. "Be careful," she said. "And don't take food from strangers. You know better than that." But I didn't push it. I didn't want to sound dramatic. Still, the next time Marissa asked if I wanted to go hang out at the park, I told her I had a headache and stayed home. I just had this weird feeling I couldn't shake. Marissa went without me anyway, of course. She always had this impulsive streak, like a magnet for trouble. When she came back later, she called me and said, "You missed it. We went to Sherry's place. It's actually kinda cool." My chest tightened. I asked her what it was like, and she said it was messy but fun, that Sherry had a ton of old CDs, and even let her sing karaoke. "She even let me try a sip of beer," she added, laughing like it was nothing. I didn't laugh. I asked her what apartment number it was, and she said she wasn't sure, but it was on the second floor, kind of in the back corner. I barely slept that night. I kept thinking about how quickly it had all changed, from grape soda at the swings to beer in some stranger's apartment. A few days later, my older sister Claire came home from college for the weekend. She was always super protective of me, and when she asked what was new, I ended up spilling everything: Sherry, the sodas, the weird apartment invitation, Marissa going over there. At first, Claire thought I was just being dramatic, but when I mentioned the beer and the fact that Sherry was always hanging around kids, her expression changed. She asked for every detail, and when I mentioned the Woodland Terrace complex, she got this tight look on her face and left the room. About an hour later, she came back and told me not to go to the park anymore. That same day, we saw a missing poster taped to the pole by the gas station. A girl named Brittany Calloway, 13, had disappeared a few neighborhoods over. Last seen, walking home from the store. Claire didn't tell our parents right away, but I saw her on the phone a lot that weekend. She even followed Marissa and me to the park one day without us knowing. I only found out later. Then, suddenly, 2 police cruisers pulled up near the playground one afternoon. They didn't turn on their sirens, just rolled in quietly and walked over to Sherry on the bench. She stood up like she was going to greet them, calm as ever, but one of the officers took her by the arm and started leading her away. I remember Marissa whispering, "What's going on?" And I didn't know what to say. We watched them put her in the back of the car, and for a moment she turned and looked right at us. She smiled, not like someone who was scared or angry, but like someone who thought this was just another game. After that day, we didn't see Sherry again. The park felt completely different, like the air had changed. For a while, there were cops walking around, talking to people in the area, even knocking on some doors at Woodland Terrace. I found out later that someone had reported suspicious behavior weeks before, but nothing had come of it. I don't know exactly what they found in her apartment, but Marissa told me in private that they asked her questions about what she saw, and that they'd taken a bunch of stuff from inside, including some clothes that didn't belong to Sherry. She also said the parrot never existed. There was no cage, no comic books. Nothing she remembered seeing during her visit was actually there. That part still freaks me out. I asked Claire if she ever found out what really happened to the missing girl, Brittany. She told me that they were still investigating, but that they had reason to believe Sherry had approached other girls in different parks before, even in towns a few hours away. I don't think they ever found Brittany, or if they did, it never made the news. What stuck with me the most was how normal everything seemed. Sherry wasn't some monster hiding in the shadows. She was just there, sitting on a bench in the sunlight, smiling like she belonged. That was the part that messed with my head for years. Marissa and I kind of drifted apart after that summer. I think she wanted to pretend none of it had happened. I get it. When you're that age, your whole world feels fragile. And something like this, it cracks everything. For a while, I couldn't go near that park without my heart racing. Even now, over a decade later, I still get this chill when I see someone sitting alone on a bench, watching kids play. It makes me wonder how many other Sherrys are out there. People who don't look dangerous, who blend in so easily, who know exactly what to say to make a kid feel special. I haven't talked about this in a long time, but something about that look she gave us as they put her in the cruiser. It still lives in the back of my mind. Like she wasn't worried. Like she knew she'd done this before, and maybe she'd do it again. I hope that's not true. I hope she never had the chance. But part of me still wonders what would have happened if Marissa had gone back to that apartment alone. What if I hadn't told Claire? What if I'd just ignored that feeling in my gut? I guess sometimes it only takes one person saying something for everything to change. I was 26 when it happened, living alone in a small duplex just outside of Tupelo, Mississippi. I'd been working as a nursing assistant at a rehab center a few miles out of town, mostly night shifts, which left my days wide open. The duplex had a spare room I never really used, and with rent going up and groceries eating a bigger chunk of my paycheck, I figured it made sense to list it. Nothing fancy, just a Craigslist post, a few photos, and a short description. I wasn't looking for a lifelong roommate or anything, just someone quiet who could help with the bills for a few months. The guy who ended up renting the room said his name was Matt Carlson. He showed up with just a duffel bag and a toolkit, said he was in town doing contracting work for a house remodel, but didn't like hotels. Mid-30s, maybe a little older, wiry build, sun-damaged skin, and this kind of blank expression, like someone who never got excited or angry, just existed. He didn't talk much, which honestly was a plus for me. The few conversations we had were weirdly formal, like he was trying to act normal but didn't quite know how. Still, he paid the rent in cash up front and didn't seem like trouble. At first it was fine. We barely crossed paths. He left early, came back late, and didn't touch anything that wasn't his. But after a couple weeks, I started noticing little things. My phone charger was unplugged from the wall one morning, even though I'm almost obsessive about leaving it in. Then I found one of my dresser drawers half open when I came home from work. Nothing missing, just open. It was easy to brush it off, tell myself I'd been careless, but a knot was starting to form in my gut. You know that feeling when something's off, but you can't put your finger on it? That was creeping in, slow but steady. The turning point for me was the mail. I got home one Tuesday and saw my mailbox hanging open. It wasn't windy and the latch clicked shut pretty tight. A few envelopes were halfway out, like someone had been rifling through them and left in a hurry. I checked inside. Nothing gone. But my Netflix DVD, yeah, I still used those back then, was missing from the usual red envelope. That night I mentioned it to Matt offhand while heating up leftovers, and he just gave this slow blink and said, "Probably the wind." His voice was completely flat. I remember thinking, he didn't even ask what was missing. Most people would at least pretend to care. I couldn't shake the vibe that I wasn't living with a normal person. More like someone playing the role of one. About a week after the mail thing, I started locking my bedroom door at night. Just something about the way Matt moved around the house. Too quiet. Like he was trying not to be heard. My door didn't have a bolt, just one of those cheap push-button knobs, but it made me feel a little better. That lasted about 3 nights. Then, one morning, I woke up and noticed the door was cracked open. I know I locked it. I tested that knob every night before bed like a ritual. I even remember hearing the click, but there it was, open by maybe an inch or two. I just stared at it from bed for what felt like a full minute, heart pounding in my ears, like my body already knew something my brain didn't want to accept. I tried convincing myself it was a mechanical issue, or maybe I'd turned it the wrong way. But that same morning I found something even weirder. My bedside lamp was unplugged. That one hit different. I never touched that plug. It's behind a heavy nightstand that I haven't moved in years, and the cord was tucked just right. For it to be out meant someone intentionally reached back there. I started to feel like I was losing my grip on reality, like maybe I was sleepwalking or forgetting things. But deep down, I knew. I knew someone had been in my room. I didn't say anything to Matt. What was I gonna say? Hey, are you sneaking into my room at night and unplugging things? It sounded insane. But I did start staying up later. I'd pretend to sleep, lights off, lying still with my ears wide open. And a few nights later, just past 3 a.m., I heard it. Soft footsteps. Not creaky floorboards or house-settling noises, but actual steps, moving slowly past my door. Then they stopped. Right outside. I held my breath so long my lungs started to burn. No knock, no voice. Just silence. And then, a faint sound, like fingers brushing against the doorknob. Not turning it, just touching it. The next morning I asked him, straight up, if he'd been in the hallway last night. He didn't even look up from his coffee, just muttered, "Didn't sleep well, walked around a bit." I wanted to scream. There was no shame, no denial, no attempt to even lie convincingly. That was the moment I decided I needed him gone. I told him my sister might be moving in soon, and I'd need the room back by the end of the month. He gave me this long, unreadable stare. Not angry, not confused, just blank. Then he nodded once and said, "Okay." But there was something in the way he said it that made my stomach twist. The week after that conversation was pure anxiety. I barely slept. I started keeping a pocket knife under my pillow, and every little sound in the house had me wide-eyed and sweating. I even thought about staying somewhere else, but something in me didn't want to leave him alone in the place. Like it'd be worse if I wasn't there to keep an eye on things. The real breaking point came when my neighbor, Ms. Gentry, went missing. She was this sweet older lady who always left a bowl of water out for stray cats, and made the best peach cobbler I've ever had. I noticed her porch light was still on one night, and her mail had been piling up. I knocked a few times. Nothing. Something in my gut told me it wasn't right. 2 days later, a cop showed up at my door. Not in a squad car, just a plain cruiser, unmarked. He asked if I knew anything about Ms. Gentry. I said I hadn't seen her in a few days, and then he asked who else lived there with me. The moment I mentioned Matt's name, the cop's whole posture shifted. He asked me to wait a moment, stepped back to his car, and made a call. Then 2 more cars pulled up, this time marked, "Lights off." One officer came to the door, another went around back. My stomach dropped when I heard them say they had a warrant for Matthew Carlson, alias unknown. Apparently, he was wanted in Louisiana for breaking into homes, sometimes while people were sleeping inside. They asked if I'd let them search the house. I stepped aside without a word. I stood in the corner of my kitchen while they opened Matt's door. I'd never been inside that room, not once. I'd assumed it was just clothes and tools. But what they found, man, I still get chills thinking about it. He had a bunch of driver's licenses spread across the dresser, all with different names but the same face. A roll of duct tape, zip ties, a burner phone with photos of different houses, mine included. One of the officers held up a notebook filled with times, addresses, and weird notes like "backdoor sticks" and "gets home 11:20, leaves shoes by bed." I saw my name written at the top of one of the pages. That's when my legs gave out and I had to sit. They never found Ms. Gentry's body. They did find a lock-picking set in Matt's duffel bag and a list of 5 addresses in Mississippi. All of them places where women lived alone. He never resisted arrest. Just stood there, stone-faced, like he'd already planned for it. I still remember the last look he gave me as they walked him out in cuffs. It wasn't anger or regret. It was like he was studying me, like I was still part of a plan that didn't go through. After they took him, the detective told me, straight up, that if I hadn't kicked him out when I did, I probably wouldn't be here to tell this story. After that, I couldn't stay in that house. Even though he was gone, every shadow felt like it was watching me. I moved out within a month, broke my lease, packed everything I could fit in my car, and crashed at my cousin's place 2 towns over until I found something else. I told my boss I needed time off for mental health reasons, and thankfully she didn't press. I didn't sleep right for weeks. Every creak in the walls, every knock at the door, it all sent my heart racing. I started checking locks 5, 6 times a night, bought cameras, even got a dog just to feel safe again. And the worst part? I still don't know how many nights he might have been coming into my room before I caught on. What messes with my head the most is how normal he looked. You picture monsters as wild-eyed and twitchy, not soft-spoken guys with toolkits and clean fingernails. He passed for a regular dude. If I hadn't paid attention to the small stuff, the open drawer, the unplugged lamp, the sound outside my door, I might have chalked it all up to paranoia. I might have ignored my gut. I still think about that notebook sometimes and how my name was right at the top. He had been watching me, tracking me, probably planning something for weeks. Whatever it was, I must have thrown off the timing when I told him he had to leave. It's been over a year now, and I've only talked about it a handful of times. Most people don't really get it unless they've gone through something similar. They nod and say, "That's crazy," but you can tell they're just being polite. They've never felt the weight of knowing someone was in your room while you slept, making plans around your every move. They've never seen their own name in a stranger's handwriting next to notes like, "Bedroom window left cracked," or "Works nights, vulnerable." That kind of thing changes how you see the world, how you trust it. Anyway, that's my story. I still check the locks 3 times every night. Sometimes more. I never rent out rooms anymore. Hell, I barely even let people into my apartment if I don't know them well. I'm not saying everyone out there is like Matt. I know most folks are decent. But I learned the hard way that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it knocks on your door with rent money in hand and a smile on its face. I'm not the kind of person who usually shares stuff like this online, but something happened to me last fall that I haven't been able to shake, no matter how much I try. My name's Ryan, I'm 22, and I was living in Denver at the time. I'd just gotten out of a messy breakup, the kind that leaves you feeling like a hollowed-out version of yourself, and all I wanted was to get out of the city for a bit. A change of scenery, somewhere quiet. I'd always liked hiking and being out in nature, so I booked a solo weekend at a remote campground near a mountain town in Colorado. I packed up my gear, drove out early on a Friday morning, and by late afternoon I was setting up my tent in this wide clearing surrounded by dense pine trees. There were no other cars parked nearby. I figured I had the whole area to myself. The first night was exactly what I needed. The air was crisp, and the only sounds were the wind through the trees and the occasional owl. I made a small fire, cooked some noodles, and just sat there, staring into the flames with that weirdly comforting feeling of being completely alone. No service, no distractions. Just silence. I slept pretty well that night too. No weird noises, no animals sniffing around the tent, nothing. It wasn't until the second night that things started to get strange. And I swear, if I hadn't experienced this myself, I'd never believe it. It started with a voice. A woman's voice. It must have been close to midnight. I was inside my tent, reading with a headlamp when I heard it. Faint at first, like it was coming from far off in the trees. "Hello? Can someone help me?" The tone was shaky, panicked. I sat up straight, turned off my headlamp and listened. At first I figured maybe someone had gotten lost or injured on a nearby trail. But this place was remote. Really remote. And I hadn't seen a single person since I got there. Still, I couldn't ignore it. I unzipped the tent, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped out into the cold, scanning the tree line. The voice called out again, a little louder this time. Same words, same exact tone. I called back, "Hey, where are you?" But got no response. Just silence. I waited. Nothing. Then, about 10 seconds later, the voice repeated, again saying, "Hello? Can someone help me?" Only this time it didn't sound quite right. There was something off about it, too consistent, like it wasn't a real voice, but a recording. I walked toward where I thought it was coming from, probably about 50 feet into the woods, careful not to trip over roots or rocks. That's when I saw it. A phone, face down on the dirt, near a tree. I picked it up, and as soon as I turned it over, the screen lit up. A video was playing on loop. It was a woman's face, covered in dirt, crying and screaming for help. Same words, same voice, over and over. I froze. My first instinct was that it had to be some kind of sick prank. But who the hell would go through all that effort way out here? There were no signs of anyone around. I didn't see any footprints except my own, and no bags or gear near the phone. It was like someone had just placed it there for me to find. The longer I stood there, the more my gut told me to leave. Not just the woods, but right then, right that second. The flashlight in my hand started to flicker, which felt straight out of a horror movie cliché, and that was enough for me. I turned around and speed-walked back to my tent, heart pounding harder than it had in years. I didn't even zip the tent back up. I just sat inside with my knife in one hand, my flashlight in the other, staring at the flap until the sun started to rise. I barely slept that night, just laid there listening for footsteps or branches snapping. But nothing came. In the morning, I told myself maybe I had overreacted. Maybe it was some stupid viral prank. Still, I wanted to check the area in daylight, just to feel more grounded. I followed the same path I had taken the night before, expecting the phone to still be there. But it was gone. Completely gone. No sign of it, no indent in the dirt where I'd picked it up. Nothing. I marked the spot with a stick just to be sure I hadn't misremembered, then kept walking a little further, past where I'd stopped. That's when I found it. It was a drainage ditch, half hidden by tall weeds and brush, maybe 20 yards past the tree where the phone had been. The smell hit me first. This awful, rotting, metallic stench that I'll never forget. I didn't want to look. Every part of me screamed to just turn around and walk away. But I peeked. And in the shallow water, barely covered by a few inches of muddy runoff, I saw what looked like a rib cage. Human. Ribs, part of a spine, scraps of a jacket or shirt caught on a branch. I couldn't see the face or a skull, but it didn't matter. I knew exactly what I was looking at. And I knew I needed to get out of there. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely use the GPS on my phone, which had just enough signal to confirm that the nearest ranger station was a 2-hour hike in the opposite direction of where I'd come in. I packed up as fast as I could. I didn't even bother rolling up the tent. I just shoved everything I could into my backpack and started walking. Fast. Not quite running, but close. I kept hearing sounds in the woods. Little snaps, rustling, movement. Could have been animals, sure, but after what I found, every single sound felt like a threat. Like someone was following me, hunting me. I didn't stop walking for anything. No food, no breaks, nothing. Just pure adrenaline and paranoia pushing me forward. The trail twisted through a dense patch of trees where everything felt darker than it should have been for mid-morning. I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced I'd catch someone ducking behind a tree or stepping out from the brush. At one point, I swear I heard footsteps that matched my pace, like someone deliberately staying just out of view. I yelled out once, just to try to scare whoever it was. "I found the body! I'm going to the Rangers." But all I got back was silence, the kind that presses on your ears. About halfway to the station, I noticed something that made my stomach turn. tied to a low-hanging branch, almost like a marker, was a strip of fabric, light blue with little stars on it. I recognized it. I'd seen it in the looped video the night before, tied around the woman's wrist. It was filthy and weather-worn, but unmistakable. That's when it really hit me. This wasn't random. I was being led. The phone, the voice, the ditch. Someone had set this up like a trail of breadcrumbs, and I'd followed every single one. I didn't know if the person behind this was still out there watching, but I wasn't going to give them another chance to get close. When I finally made it to the ranger station, I could barely speak. I must have looked like hell because the guy at the desk stood up the second he saw me. I told them everything: the phone, the video, the ditch, the remains. They sent out a search team immediately. A couple of hours later, they confirmed they'd found human remains in the same spot I described. No ID on the body, no phone, nothing else left behind. The area was sealed off for investigation, and I gave a full report. They told me I probably stumbled across an old crime scene, but they didn't sound confident. More like they were trying not to scare me. That was 6 months ago. I haven't heard anything since. No updates, no arrests, just silence. I think about it constantly. What would have happened if I'd gone further into the woods that night? What if I hadn't turned back when I did? I still hike, but I don't go alone anymore. And I never, ever ignore my gut. Because I don't think I was just some guy who stumbled onto something. I think I was bait. I think someone wanted me to find that phone, follow that voice, lean in just a little too far. And if I had, I don't think I'd be here telling this story right now.